Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this IET Berkshire event on conversational AI. I'm just going to go on to the gallery view so I can see everybody. We've still got people coming in. So we've still got some people coming in, but we'll just do some housekeeping just while these people get in. This is obviously a webinar tonight, and so we're going to ask you to stay muted during the presentation. We'll take questions and answers at the end because it's just going to be much easier logistically to do that. But please put your question, you'll all see the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen. You're welcome to put your questions in as we go along and we'll address them at the end. Now, it's my real pleasure to introduce tonight Paul Emery as our speaker. Paul founded and runs a consultancy on artificial intelligence. He's a phenomenal speaker. He's regularly speaking at major AI and technology events. He's always entertaining. He's a performer who intrigues, challenges, and informs. And I'm looking for a good dose of those from him tonight. So ladies and gentlemen, please give your most rapturous, excited Zoom welcome to Paul Emery. Paul, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you for that welcome, Eddie. It's a pleasure to be here, and good evening, EIT. I'm now going to share my screen so that we can get going. Excellent. I think we are on our way. My first question to you, and perhaps you can type something into the chat so we know that it's working. Are you a geek? And this screen, there are two logos. If you're able to identify both of those, that tells me you're a geek. So any of you prepared to identify those logos, where they come from? Anyone prepared to chat? There must be some geeks in the EIT. I know Eddie's one. So we've got some chats coming in. Okay, so we are getting Star Trek, and we are getting Star Wars, the Jedis. So good evening, EIT. So this is about the future that appears to be far away. But I am going to try and convince you that the future is today. So if you're all ready, if the geeks, I'm a geek, Eddie's a geek, we're happy to be geeks. If we're all ready, let's get cracking. Just get that ready. Here we go. So if we are talking about the future, we can see that we could have a fantastically positive, where there is a sustainable abundance for all, where we have the best medical care. Things are fantastic. AI is working for all of us. On the downside, we could have social collapse. We could have something which doesn't work for us. And the way we can kind of describe those two opposites is to talk about the Star Trek economy and the Star Wars economy. Now, I am much more interested in the lessons that we can take from the Star Trek economy because it's a positive world. So I'd like to convince you tonight that the technology that is coming towards us is going to be the benefit for all of us. Now, we are entering into exponential times. All we have to do is look at the COVID. And if you'd listened to the news recently, they're talking about if Boris Johnson had caused us to lock down 1 week earlier, 9 days earlier, we could have saved 20,000 lives. We, as engineers, as mathematicians, have a feeling for the exponential world, but it's only when we see something like COVID and these rapid changes do we really get to understand the impact. It's so difficult to manage these crises, but luckily we have technology coming to help us because we're moving towards the world of Star Trek. So tonight, what I would like to do is look at the near future, talk about conversational AI, to give you a little demo, and then to give you some takeaways. So if you're ready, if you're strapped in, let's go. Now I'm going to ask you another question. How do you perceive this picture? Do you see it as a modern environment? Do you see something of the future? Maybe we could have a few people chat. Any ideas, anyone? So let's have a look at the chat. Future in the past, decay, stagnation, past glories, an industrial revolution. Great. These are all great. Now, for me, the shocker was, this is how I perceive Russia. Now, I met with a Russian company and they had the audacity to tell me that the UK was backwards. Let me repeat that, backwards. We're living in a backwards country. So here I am looking at this picture and imagining the Soviet past, and these Russians are telling me we're backwards. So I started to think, why on earth would they say that? What would possess them? So as a futurist, quite often what we'll do is go back into the past. And if we look into the past, we can see another time when the UK, Britain, Europe, they were a backwater. And that was the time of the Silk Roads, when the center of the earth, all across Middle East, Asia to China, was connected up with caravans. And these caravans, they took more than just goods. They took ideas. They took religions. First we had Judaism, which blasted a path from west to east. Then we had Christianity, and then we had Islam. And Islam is probably the one that is now dominating. So many ideas, cultural exchanges. If we look at the Roman Empire, did they look west? Did they look east? Alexander the Great, where did he go? So there was a time in our past when everything was to the east. So tonight, I would like to challenge you that perhaps our future is actually today, and that future is in the east. Now, another question for you people who are happy on chat. What is this building? Any ideas what it is? Please feel free to chat. Hospital? Good one. Anyone else? Okay, let me give you a clue. This is a highly rated British business incubator. I believe it's somewhere around the Bristol area, and it's what we do really well. We incubate businesses and we come up with AI projects and we do some good stuff. Yeah. Does anyone see anything wrong with this picture? Yeah, you've all seen these kinds of buildings. You may work in them. You may have recourse to these kinds of infrastructures. So that's this country. Let's look to the east. And what do we see in China? in this picture on the left-hand side, one of those buildings will be a business incubator, a brand spanking new business incubator. And that will be in a brand spanking new science park. And then that will be inside a brand new science city. That is the scale of ambition. And if you look at the map, these things are all over the place. And if you want to Google, just go and have a look at Tuz Park. So that's what we're up against. And now can you imagine why this Russian business, who are in the AI space, said to me, the UK is in the past. The UK is a backwater. Now, why would the Chinese do this? Why would they create all these science parks? Well, think about it. If you come up with a new technology, maybe it's an automated AI-based bin collection system, why not start that in a brand new city? Why not work with the city regulators, the lawmakers, and iron out all of the issues around the technology, the social side, and the laws? So you can see the Chinese are absolutely gunning for it. And what's their plan? Their plan is to have a dominant player in every single sector that you can think of, from biotech to telecommunications to robotics. And no wonder they're in the news with Huawei. Yeah, a few years ago, I was in data centers that didn't even exist. So that is what we're up against. That is where we need to look. That is the future today. And we can learn from that. And that's what I would like to do tonight. So I just want to give you some ideas around how our technologies have progressed, and just to situate ourselves with this conversational AI. 2 seconds, there we go. Okay, so all of us pretty much have grown up with a PC. You may be using a PC or a laptop tonight. Then the new generation have actually, in some cases, have skipped the PCs and have gone straight to mobile devices. And guess what comes next? What comes after the mobile device? Conversational AI. Now, Haptic, they're a company that claim they are one of the top providers of conversational AI solutions. What they have said and what they have suggested is that the last billion of internet users that connected to the internet skipped the desktop and they went straight to the mobile devices. Now, I don't know how much your mobile device is worth. Is it £1,000? Is it £500? That is quite a hostile cost to get across. So the future then is people will skip the PC, they will skip the mobile devices, and they will go straight to these conversational AI technologies. Now, I made a slight mistake. I said the last billion went to mobile devices. It was actually the last 250 million. What they're predicting is the next billion will skip the PCs, the mobile devices, and will go straight into conversational AI, the next billion. So I think it's worth exploring this conversational AI if you are in agreement with me and why you've turned up tonight. So let's keep going. So what do we mean by conversational AI? Well, what we mean is the ability to converse with interfaces, with systems, through text and through voice. It's as simple as that. And if you need some convincing where the market is going, so in November 2019, we can see the annual growth in these voice-based systems. They are absolutely exploding. So I would say we need to wake up and we need to understand what this means for us. Let's try and get our head around how we might actually use these systems. And I thought I would just go through some use cases with you. Now, think about driving cars. I can really understand this if I apply the example of my wife. My wife, when she's driving a car, she has 1 foot on the accelerator and 1 foot on the brake. And she never seems to quite understand which one she's using, and terrifies me. Now, the reason she does that is because she learned to drive in Paris, where if you've ever driven there, then you too would have your foot on the brake and accelerator, but at the same time, to be able to react as fast as possible. Now, if you're in that situation, what do you want to do? Do you want to fiddle with buttons and touchscreens, or do you want the system to respond to you? Alexa, where's the next exit? Or perhaps Tesla, where do I get off? So I kind of get and understand the use case when we're driving cars and why we might want voice systems. Let's think about the medical side. Now imagine you're in the middle of nowhere, could be in the middle of Africa or up a mountain somewhere. Now that Elon Musk has got all these satellites that are going into space, potentially you could be connected wherever you are in the world, and you could have the best medical diagnosis and treatment possible. So that again makes perfect sense. I can understand that use case. Gaming. Now I'm of a certain age, I have a son, and about you guys, if you've ever tried to compete with a teenager playing games, it's not possible. I can't react, I can't press the buttons, and if I'm playing one of those first-person shooters, I'm dead within seconds. However, as an oldie, perhaps I can strategize a little bit better. And if I was able to speak to the system, I'd say, look, you take care of the ducking, but let's carry out my strategy. So within gaming, I can understand why a voice-based interface might level the field. Moving on, what about romance? What about dating? Now, I don't know about you guys, but me, the whole dating scene, impossible to understand. Did I send a message that was going to hit well? Did I offend? And when the message comes back, was that a yes? Was that a no? I'm clueless. However, if there was an AI-based voice interface, that could guide me and say, yeah, that message you sent, yeah, that's probably okay. That will create joy. Or actually, if you were about to send that message, that may create a hostile reaction. Perhaps you shouldn't do that. So again, I kind of get that use case, and that could be massive in that market. Moving along, the home, the smart city. Now we can all see the best use case here, and that is the fridge. Which of you would not want to speak to your fridge? Eh? Are there enough beers in my fridge? So I can kind of get that use case as well. And then the financial industry. Well, the financial industry, that needs a whole slide to itself. So I think we'll move on. So as we can see, or as I'm trying to demonstrate to you, the world could be improved, made much better, make it more like the Star Trek economy by having voice-enabled systems. So let's deal with the banking sector. How do they operate at the moment? So I had to phone up Santander to carry out a transaction for my father. My father suffers from Alzheimer's, and he's no longer able to deal with banks, especially automated systems. So I went online and I tried to carry out an action, and it gave me this error. What does that mean? I Googled it, couldn't find it. I was lost. In the end, I had to phone the bank, press 1, press 2, your call is important to us. It must have taken me 10, 15 minutes of mucking around for them to tell me that actually, because I've got power of attorney, what I needed to do was wait. I needed to set my transaction into the future. And I'm thinking, what a waste of space that is. Why could they not have helped me? And so with conversational AI, these kinds of problems could be answered in an instant. Let's take direct line. Again, I was trying to carry out some kind of transaction for my father, and boy, it just drove me round the bend, listening to their menu system and messages and press 1, press 2, your call is important. Almost lose the will to live. However, if there was a system that was voice-based, could easily sort this out, or chatbot or whatever, could easily sort that out. And again, another insurance company. You sit there, they tell you how important your call is, yet they do nothing. So I'd like to convince you tonight that all of these systems could be improved, made better through use of these technologies. So let's just dig in a little bit and try and understand how these might work. So let's imagine this is you and you want to get something done. You want to buy a product. So what you would do, you would talk to a voice device or you would talk to a chatbot in a conversational way. And then you would be hooked up to an organization. That organization would pick up on your request. And there are these things called APIs. So these are existing systems that connect different systems together. And you can make a transaction and have that delivered to you. And you're a happy customer. So really all we're doing is we're introducing on the left-hand side these voice devices and these chatbot systems to existing organizations. And we're just linking them together. And what I'd like to do now is to give you some data, to give you some examples from not Europe, not from the backwater, but a little bit more towards the east. So UniCredit Bank, an example here where they're using AI assistants. Here we can see they're getting a scale, they're getting volume, and it's not about replacing people. It's about helping the operators give a better level of service. So this is already working. People are already receiving better levels of service. Here's another example. Now this one, it's less about saving jobs. It's more about automating things and answering questions as fast as possible. So you can see once we're getting into millions of requests, millions of cases, if we can handle those to a very high level, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you bring in these technologies to support your business? If they're going to be doing it in the East and you're not doing it, you're going to be faced with some kind of competitive pressure. So just going to come to the end of the overview and say that the future is the new Silk Roads. It's India, it's China, it's the belt, one road, one belt policy of China. It's connecting all these countries together. It's the exchange of ideas, it's commerce. All of these things are happening now, and we need to pay attention, especially when we're living in the exponential world where just applying human resources is not going to be enough. And we've seen that in the current COVID crisis. When they announced the loans to businesses, people went on the phones and they had to wait for hours and hours. The banks were swamped. They just could not cope. COVID-19 is a pandemic, and its consequences were to create exponential type problems. And the good thing about the Star Trek economy, these technologies are here, they're right now. If we implement them, we can cope, we can deal with these exponential type problems. So that's the overview of what these technologies are and how they might be able to help us. So what I'd like to do now is to dig a little bit deeper and try and see how these things actually work, and this will take us to a demonstration. So the idea I'm trying to convey here is, let's go and look at the guts, let's go and look at the internals of these systems. So if you're ready, if you need to take a little quick break and recenter yourselves and get ready for a little bit of meat, a bit more technical detail, we're about to do that. Strap yourselves back in, let's get going. So what's the goal? The goal, and the name Conversational AI kind of gives you the idea of what we're trying to do. We're trying to have conversations. So as a human, I'm speaking to an agent and we're having a little conversation back and forth, back and forth. Now there are two types of conversations. We can have linear. And so the linear conversation is, we have a straightforward request. I'd like to book a taxi. You give the time and the date and the service you're looking for, and the response comes back. Your request has been understood, it's been sorted out, and all is done. That's quite straightforward. You might be able to achieve something similar on a website with a form. Now things get just a little bit more complicated when we go non-linear. So non-linear means I've started the same kind of conversation. However, as I'm a human, I probably don't remember all the things in the right order. So I'd like to make a booking for tomorrow at 2 p.m. So we've got the date, we've got the time, but something is missing. And our system has to be a little bit more clever, has to be able to analyze that conversation and work out that it can't fulfill this yet, it can't deliver back to the customer because something is missing. So it has to go and try and find out. So it comes back and says, well, we might be delivering pizzas, mail, or this, if it's Amazon, they could have a whole range of services. So it has to try and work out from the context, from what it's been asked, what we're trying to solve. So they'll go back and they'll say, well, did you really mean a taxi? Yeah, so try and fix that conversational problem. And then the human may go back and say, yes. Now, what's really important here is the context. I've given you a very simple request here. There's only three things. There's a date, there's a time, and there's a service. However, if this is a more complicated environment, imagine you're filling in a form and you miss one or two of those fields, well, which one are we dealing with? So I might have replied yes. I've not said, yes, it's the taxi. So the system has to start to worry and think about context, especially when things get a little bit more complicated. So as you can already see, there's a lot of processing going on to try and deal with something which is quite simple. There's only three things that we need to sort out, which is the service, which is the date, and the time. So now let's take a look at the AI part of this, or as it's termed, the natural language processing. If we take the sentence, London is the capital and the most populous city of most populous city of England and the United Kingdom. So that's a nice sentence there. Now, what is the AI trying to do? I mean, does the AI really understand what London is? Does it understand what England is? Does it understand what United Kingdom is? No. So this isn't super intelligence. It doesn't understand what you're asking for. What it's trying to do is break your conversation up into items, into chunks it can then deal with. And what it has to start doing is start predicting what you're asking for. So in this case, we look at the word London, we look at the surrounding words, and then we condense that down and we can work out it's a proper noun. So if we take that forward, what that means is we've got to analyze the entire sentence and put it into a form that we can deal with. Okay? So I'm now going to take that to the next level forward. And let's take an example. Essentially, these three questions are quite similar. We're talking about weather, but I've not asked them in the same ways. So what's the forecast? What is the weather like right now? What's the temperature going to be tomorrow in Seattle? So each of these has slightly more bits of information. So what our system has to do is to collect that. And so our system that's responding to a user, to a human, is called an agent. That could be a voice system. It could be a chatbot. And it has to take that text in, has to break it into chunks and try and work out what is going on. And what we're doing is we have to forecast something called an intent. So when we are using these technologies, what we're trying to do is boil things down to intent. So what is an intent? An intent is something that we can respond to. So it might be booking an appointment, it might be telling you the time, it might be giving you the weather forecast. So the system has to work out which one of these various procedures to deliver something back is the one we're talking about. And if we're able to do that, then we need to be able to extract some information and then make a reasonable response back to the user. So let's just take that again and go forward. So our user is giving an expression. our agent could have literally thousands of different intents. So it's got to try and match the best one, has to predict. So that's where some of the AI comes in, has to have a reasonable confidence level. So it's no good if you're asking the weather and then the system says to you, well, where do you want to fly to? Yeah. So that's where some of the intelligence comes in to try and determine what on earth is that user talking about. Once we've got the intent, what we have to do is we have to give some guidance to the system, to the AI, and we have to carry out what are called training phrases. We have to give examples of the sorts of things that the user's asking. And then from then, we have to try and understand what the parameters are, so that in the end, we can work out what needs to be done and go back with some kind of response. So that is essentially, in a nutshell, in its most basic form, how these agents, whether they're voice or whether they're chat-based, text-based systems, they work. It's all about trying to understand what you've just said, match that up into something that it knows, and then go off and work out the answer and then come back. That's the ideal world. So showtime. So what I'd like to do now is to take you through a very simple demonstration and see if we can do a little bit of intent matching and give an answer to a question. So it's called the Charlie bot, and we're going to ask it a question. Do you like Star Wars or Star Trek? Now, if the system hasn't been trained, yeah, it's not going to know the answer. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the Charlie bot not knowing what on earth we are talking about. So I'm just going to change the share. And let's go to Charlie bot. Okay, so there's Charlie bot. So it's a bot, we can speak to it, we can say hi, and Charlie will match that up to an intent, and it realizes that's a greeting, and it will come back and it will give us some kind of answer. So if we now ask it about a Star Trek movie, let's make some mistakes as well. Your recommended film. Okay, so we can see that Charlie bot doesn't have a clue. So at this stage, I can happily declare that Charlie is not a geek because she has no idea what we're talking about. So now let's go and help Charlie. So we're going to use Google's Dialogflow product. And earlier on, we were talking about intents. So let's create an intent. And let's call this the EIT movie intent. Now, we have to give some training phrases. What is your favorite movie? Do you prefer Star Wars or Star Trek? Film is better, Star Wars or Star Trek? Are you a Trekkie? Now you might notice that these are just slightly different. What motion picture would you recommend? So we're giving it five phrases to train, and now we need to come up with some responses. So we could give a very simple answer. Star Trek. I would recommend the film Spock. You haven't lived if you haven't seen Star Trek. And then one final one. I am a Star Trek fan. Okay, so we've given some possible responses, and we try and add a little bit of personality if we can. We save all of those. The intent is saved. We now go back to our bot. Again, we'll put in some mistakes. What is your recommended film? Okay, so we've now given some knowledge to Charlie. And what we'll do now is we'll actually phone Charlie. So let's go and phone Charlie.
Hi, how are you doing? I will try to answer your questions.
Hi, Charlie. What's your favorite movie?
I would recommend the film with Spock.
Thank you, Charlie. How old are you?
Age is just a number.
Charlie, when were you born?
Born in the time of coronavirus.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. So you can see that it's fairly straightforward to build these conversational systems and add the knowledge to it. So what I'd like to do now is go back to our PowerPoint. Let's go back. Okay. And what's really interesting, and this is where we see the power of the AI. If we look at our training phrases, they're all slightly different. And because we're using AI and there is there's a model, natural language model that is created for the intent, it's able to work out. So what is and what's, it's able to work out. That what I mean is what is. I've also used the word recommended, and it's able to realize that can be easily matched to recommend. So there's a huge amount of work that has gone into the natural language processing systems, which means that it can deal with idiot users like myself. And so this stuff is, we can imagine our Star Trek movies where we're saying, Kirk to Enterprise, beam me up, Scotty, all that kind of technology, which seem a million miles away, light years away, is actually here. It's right now, and all we need to do is exploit these technologies. So moving on slightly. So you might be thinking, so what? So you've just shown us a demo, you've typed in a bit of text, and so how does that help me? How does it help me that the Charlie bot likes Spock? How does that help me? So why would I give a monkeys? Well, let's just quickly review why we might want these technologies. So the first idea here is scale. So once you set up one bot, the cost of having additional bots is negligible. So if we are a bank, suddenly we're having a massive surge of people asking questions, filling in forms, we can very easily take one bot and create 1,000 or even 1,000,000. So the scalability, and it's not possible to go from 10 staff in a call center to 1,000 overnight. It's just not possible. The speed. Yeah, these things can be quickly deployed. We can add to their knowledge, and we can even use them to train humans so that they can add real good value. And also, as we saw in one of those previous use cases, we can augment the capability of humans. So if we've got someone new to the business, they've just joined the front line, they're trying to answer questions, these bots can actually provide answers to them if they're then going to have to, maybe, an example would be patients. And we had that in the news today. They cancelled the app because they would rather it came from humans. So in this example, the bot could help the human give the right answer to the patient. And data, we collect lots and lots of data, and I'll come back to that later on. And it's all about the customer experience. So we can use these technologies to improve the customer experience, make people's lives easier so they're not sitting on phones pressing 1, 2, 3, 4, have you read our terms and conditions and all that kind of nonsense. We can make a real difference to people's lives in the way they consume your products and services. And then the real enabler, the real advantage is it can take us to the next level of AI. That is really what we're on about here. It's opening the doors. So we're nearly done. And so I just want to pick up on that idea of the gateway to AI and Mr. Data, the Star Trek economy. So let's take a new customer. Maybe it's you're dealing with an organization for the first time. You speak to one of these agents. It does a pretty good job in trying to understand what you're asking it for, and it maybe pre-qualifies you, extracts a few more bits of information from you so that it can give you a better service a little bit later on. You then go into the business or the organization. There is a process, a product, could be an insurance policy, a banking service, you name it. And then you come out the other end, you've got your answer, you've got your service, and everyone is happy. Now we get to the key, and that is the data we collect. So we collect lots of data that gives us insight so that we can improve the customer experience, and then we can loop round. This is where the AI comes in. We can loop around it again and again, and iteratively, we can make our services better and better and better. That is the power. And a lot of organizations, they don't know where the data is. They can't get hold of the data. Yet these systems, as soon as you start using them, will give you lots of data. So to recap, we're not talking about the future. We're not talking about some Starship Enterprise and beam me up, Scotty. We're talking about the now, the here and now. These technologies are here right now. And when we're talking about conversational AI, what we really mean is bots. And that is expressed in the natural language processing. Again, to use one of Boris Johnson's favorite phrases, it's oven ready, it's working, it's ready. And my last question to you is, can we afford to wait? Can we really afford to wait? And I would probably suggest to you, no, taking us back to their science parks and science cities. So I'd like to thank you for your time. I'd like to thank the EIT. I'm a Toastmaster. I'm the Vice President of Education at the London Data Science Speakers, and I also run my own business. I'm happy if you reach out to me. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'd now like to hand the stage back to Eddie. So thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Paul. That was really interesting. Paul, are you okay to take some questions and answer?
Yes, of course.
Yep. So everybody, if you look down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. If you like to put any questions you've got into that, then we will try and answer questions as they come up. And we'll just take the short delay that there might be for questions. And actually, while people are typing the questions, Abaya, would you like to maybe just talk about the next events that are coming up?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I think until we get questions, I'd like to mention that two events coming that we are organizing in the next month in July. So 16th of July, we have interview skills event, in fact, presented by our own host today, Eddie McGuire. The second one is the following week on the 23rd of July, which is a 5G opportunities lecture. So we will publish all these events in due course. Stay tuned. Thank you, Eddie. And I will say a few words about the committee at the end of the question. So over to you.
Okay, Paul, we've got quite a few questions starting to come in on the chat. Do you want to pick them up, or do you want me just to pick them at random and chuck them at you?
Yeah, I think if you, because as you know the IET better than I do, perhaps you could pick questions that are relevant to your audience.
Okay. Well, let's pick up the first one that came in from Patricia, and there's some other people asking about security implications, privacy as a technology. And the question from Keith was, will the bots understand GDPR?
Okay, so that's a chicken and egg kind of thing. So on one level, these bots are stupid, absolutely stupid. They are think of a baby. They have to be taught. They have to be brought together. So the GDPR is really the environment. So it's the environment that you introduce these systems into. So the bots will pick up data. They don't understand that data. They will take the data from A to B. They will answer the data. They will put those into logs, and then they'll think about it. So again, think about a young baby. Give it a yogurt pot. It will eat the yogurt. It will spill the yogurt everywhere, and it will move on. And then someone else has to go and clean the mess up. So this would have to fit into good IT and ethics practices. So that responsibility doesn't go away. So you, as the owner of that technology, if you decide to deploy those technological solutions, you need to, within your IT framework, have the policies and procedures in place. So these things will create lots of data. Well, what do you do with that? Where do you store it? And when do you expire that data? When do you get rid of it? Now, where the bots could help is if there is a query around that data, do you have data on me? You could then have an intent that went and checked databases, and it could come back and say, yep, we've got data on you. What would you like to do? The person may say, well, send it to me. Well, the bot can go and do that. It can send that data. And if the person said, delete all my data, well, the bot can then delete all of that data. Yep. So it's a tool. It's a hammer. How you use that hammer is really down to the business or the organization and how that technology is being thought of and deployed.
Okay, I think I know what your answer to the next question was but John asks, I get the feeling that the business processes in many banks, etc., are pretty clunky and flawed. Will good AI still work if the business process is not optimal?
Okay, so you basically just made the argument that the Russian company made to me. And that was that UK businesses, you know, they've had IT for 30, 40 years. There are systems that are running on bells and whistles and steam and COBOL that people dare not touch. And that is the problem. So these systems are enclosed, and you then have to move into new kinds of IT methodologies, such as, I think it's SOA, where you build connectors, you scrape data from old systems, you put them into new systems, and then from that point onwards, you can decide what you're going to do with them. So in this context, the chatbots will go and speak to your customers as a human would, so they will behave in the same way as humans, and they will create new data. So there is some plumbing required in how you take that data where you put it, what you do with it, how you analyze it. Yeah, it will create new sets of data. An example would be sentiment analysis. So the way people are speaking to you can be analyzed, and we can understand if those customers are upset, or if they're teenagers, or they're stressed. And then we can have processes that can kick in that maybe react to that and deal with the customer in a better way. So that's where we're coming to the customer experience. So on one level, these technologies give us access to AI, but really their power is in the customer experience. We can add value. We can work out how these customers are feeling. If we keep getting the same question again and again and again, that tells the business that they need to do something about it. There are pain points that need to be solved. So it can be a double-edged sword. It can reveal that your company or your bank is in a terrible state. But in a way, if you want to change and grow and improve, you need to know that kind of stuff.
Okay. Right, just give you a minute to take breath while I frame another question. This is from an anonymous attendee, and the question is, thank you. What's the difference between conversational AI and NLP? Is the former simply a friendlier way of framing the idea? Okay, so NLP, if you think about the human brain, the NLP is the recognition of what you have said. So there's part of your brain that starts to decompose that language and creates understanding. So the NLP is processing that language. So the conversation part comes from, I say something, the bot says something, and we go backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. That's the conversational part. So the NLP is intrinsic to understanding. And if the NLP doesn't work very well, then that conversation falls apart. So you can't have the conversation without the NLP. Now that's not strictly true, because there are other chatbot systems prior to the NLP that use rule-based systems, but then you end up with thousands, hundreds of thousands of rules, and they're pretty inflexible. Whereas the NLP can kind of work and has been trained on data, can deal with mistakes, and try and work out to a better level than maybe the rules that you have set up. So to recap, conversations are multiple instances of the NLP going backwards and forwards with a user. So the conversation is that flow, starting at the top. I want this. Did you mean that? Yes, I can deal with that. Here's your piece of information. This is how you go about it. It's that conversation that you would have with another human being that can be replicated within these technologies. Okay. There's a fair amount of people starting to look forward, and they're asking questions about the direction. And so from an example is here from Richard, isn't the direction of AI more towards not having to teach bots, but the bots being able to learn and develop knowledge themselves? Okay, so yeah, so we're now getting into the realm of more advanced AI. Now, what is missing from that more advanced AI is the domain knowledge. So the way I run my business isn't going to be the same as the way someone else runs their business. And that domain knowledge has to be transferred and then encoded into procedures and processes. That's where that whole notion of intents come from. So yes, the natural language processing, the transcription, if someone was to speak in German and then we wanted the answer in French, all those things could grow using more advanced AI techniques. However, that customer experience of what we're trying to achieve for that customer is outside of the narrow domain of language processing. So we've got two things going on. What did the person say? So that's where the NLP comes in. But then we've got to respond and do something.
You know, so how would a generic AI? So let's take the example of a baby. A baby learns language, but that doesn't mean that baby knows how to drive a bus or operate a nuclear power plant. That baby can learn to do all of those things, but it needs to be trained. So within that domain, that domain-specific knowledge and what those processes are, how they've been broken down, how we're supposed to react to them, all of those things need to be taught to the bot. But that's a really good question.
Okay. Let's go for a really simple one, and probably a quick answer here might be appropriate. What's the most advanced chatbot available today, in your opinion, Paul? That's
okay, so there is actually a competition for this. It's called the Loebner Prize, and there is one chatbot which seems to have dominated again and again, and it's called Mitsuku. And there's a guy called Steve, I can't remember his surname right now, but he's a British guy. He lives up north. You can contact him on Facebook. He works for Google, or used to work for Google, but kind of developed his own system pretty much before everyone else. You can go to his website and get your own bot called Pandora. You can even subscribe to his service. So the bot is called Mitsuku, and you can have that built into your systems. And I think it's won the prize 5 or 6 times, where they go up against different bots, and they're able to compete. They are judged, and this bot has been exceptional at being able to carry out human-like conversations. Now, again, these competitions, they have to be done in a certain way, because as soon as you go off the language processing and you start going into domain knowledge, then they struggle, because they haven't been adapted to that domain type stuff. So Mitsuku.
Okay, I see there's some questions come in on the chat as well as a Q&A. Now there's a few people asking questions about specific products, or specific questions like security, or Paul, are you okay if we share your email address so people can contact you directly?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, in terms of bots, people talk about Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So Google have something called Dialogflow, and what you'll find is if you search for a chatbot provider, there are thousands, literally. I mean, you will be overwhelmed, and most of the bots on the market are very, very simple. They don't use AI. They can only deal with simple use cases. And actually what they do is that the better ones will then hook up to Google's Dialogflow, and they will pass on the language processing to Google. So Google will work out what the user is trying to say, and then they'll report back to these other chatbot providers so that they can then match it to an intent, and that intent will then carry out the task that the user wants. So it really depends. If you're looking to get these products for your business or for your organization, I would say you kind of need to be a little bit technology agnostic, and think about why you would want one of these systems. Yeah, are you adding value? Would you make life better? And if you can answer yes to that, then it's worth identifying all of your use cases. And then once you've done that, if you speak to people like myself or other companies, they can then come back to you and say, actually, you need something really simple, or maybe you should start with something really simple, or maybe you need something a bit more advanced, more complicated. Now, however, there is a warning here, and that is, if you create a chatbot and use a chatbot for your business, and it's not good enough, what you will do is you will cause dissatisfaction. People will ask it a couple of questions, and they'll go, well, that was rubbish. Then that expectation has been ruined, it's been set low, and they won't come back. So there's a certain amount of judgment required to make sure that you define what you need and you make that clear to the users, so they can't book their holidays, they can't ask about the weather, but they can check their bank statement. So you just need to be very clear in the approach you take.
I think you've probably answered one of the debates that's raging on the chat at the moment about whether bots are really providing customer service or not. And there's some people who've had some really disappointing experiences and some who are proponents and have had good experiences. So I think you've probably answered that debate that's going. Here's a question from Ahmed. With 1 billion predicted and more users in the near future, how's bandwidth being managed to cope with the density of traffic?
Okay, I think that's probably outside of my my domain and my knowledge. You know, the internet has been growing, it's been scaling, the data centers have been added left, right, and center. These satellites are going up. So I would say the industry as a whole, they're adapting and they're working with new technologies, 5G and all the rest of it. So I probably wouldn't be too worried about that, because there are other technologies such as caching, which can reduce some of the processing required. So I would be fairly confident that having seen how we've grown the internet as a technology and as a service, that that people will maintain that. Now, I did work in data centers for a while, and the particular data center that I worked in had a policy of never going to capacity. So they would always get to 50 to 70%. And at that point, they would grow their technology. They would buy more leased lines, they would buy more routers, they would buy more technology. So they would always have a margin so that they wouldn't be completely blown out of the water. Okay.
So here's, we're actually slightly over time, but let's give you another, maybe a last question, then we can have Abaya talk a little bit about the IET very, very briefly. And I will put your email address up on the chat, because there are some people who've got some quite specific questions around products or services, and they can contact you directly, Paul, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
But here's a really philosophical question from Darren. And the question is, do you think the stronger privacy laws in some countries hold them back from developing these systems?
Okay, so I think what you've done here is gone to the heart of the debate of ethics. So on the one hand, we've got the Chinese approach, and then we've got the European approach of having GDPR and personal data. Now, that I think is probably a subset of the issue. So there are certainly privacy issues. So if we're using things like Facebook, we certainly do need to worry about that. But if we're dealing with anonymized data, so for example, let's take sentiment analysis. If we were to anonymize that, and if we were to collect that data through chatbots and voice-based systems, we could then understand if we were providing a good service, how our customers were behaving, whether or not we needed to take action to improve our services. So on one level, there'll be areas where we can't make improvements because we don't have access to the data. And perhaps those are products and services where we will lose out, and those jurisdictions that don't worry about the data as much will be stronger. But that doesn't mean there aren't other areas where we can improve. So things like response rates, how quickly do we respond to questions, how quickly do we get the right answer, all those sorts of things are still massive positives, all around improving the customer experience, making things better for the customer. And if you're doing that, you are improving loyalty, you're improving trust. Those are all good things. So they don't all necessarily have to be wrapped up into privacy issues. I'm not negating the issues around privacy and ethics and all those sorts of things. Those are really important, and we will certainly lose out to jurisdictions that don't care about those sorts of things. However, what will be the benefit? Will they retain their customers? Will they have more trust? Those things are questionable. Eddie, you still there?
Yes, I am still here. We're just doing a quick handover. I'm just saying there are still some very good questions in the pipeline, but some very practical ones. I'm just about to put Paul's email address on the chat so you can contact Paul directly. I'm sure he'll be very happy to field your questions there. And I'm going to ask Abaya just to talk a little bit about, he's looking for some help, and I'm going to ask him to come on and talk about the local IET committee.
Thank you, Eddie. Before you say thank you to Paul, let me say a few words about the IET and what we do. So, in fact, this is our first virtual event that we organized. I have to say it's a very successful one as well. So we had over 100, so that's very good. And we will be doing similar events in the coming months or so. We are a group of enthusiastic professionals try to promote engineering in the regional, in Berkshire, mainly in the Berkshire area, but now it doesn't have to be limited to Berkshire because anybody can connect from anywhere. So of course, the committee is about 12 to 15 volunteers. We do various things like this. And currently there are a few vacancies. So if anybody like to help us organizing, it doesn't have to be organizing. There are a few ways you can help. Please get in touch with me. My name is Abaya Sumanasena. So if you, in fact, if you go to, if you search on Google IET Berkshire Committee, it will give you a website called My Community. It's something like a local committee information there. Please reach to us, and if you like to help, we would always welcome your help. Thank you, Eddie. I think that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Abaya. So anybody who has any would like to help organizing meetings, spreading the word, getting those technology messages out. We do a lot of work with schools locally too. So if that floats your boat, please get in touch. But I think I'd like to round up the evening by thanking Paul for a really, really intriguing speech. He's certainly raised my awareness of chatbots, and I guess the demo for me was something that made me realize not only is this stuff here, but it seems to be pretty accessible, and I'm now certainly convinced that the future is now. So I'd like all of us to give Paul a great big virtual round of applause for a really well-presented, well-constructed, informative and entertaining speech. And I'm gonna say, do it now. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you very soon at the next event, which is being run by me, as Abaya said, and it's on interview technique. If you've ever wanted to be sure that you are able to present yourself at your very best when you turn up for an interview, come along. We've got some really good, we've got a lot of the unwritten rules to expose and help people with. So look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.